welcome back once again to RPMbassy. Today I was thinking about what albums are coming up for anniversaries, and this is an anniversary kind of. Technically we've missed like the big one. It would have been last year for 40 years, but 16th of July 1984 the band Sade released their debut album Diamond Life. So that's what we're talking about today. So Sade of course are so called because of their lead singer Sade Adu, or otherwise known as Helen Fowler Sade Adu. The way they formed, it's weird actually, it's quite quick in terms of going from being formed to being signed to releasing this album to the success they went on to have. So Sade was a singer, like a backup singer in a band called Pride, which featured Ray St. John, who we'll get into in a moment. And you also had members who would later on become members of Sade as well. So you had Stuart Matthewman and Paul Denman and Paul Cook, who were in Pride. And they would later go on to appear on this album. And the song Smooth Operator, which again we will get into in a moment, was originally written between Sade and Ray St. John, who was in the band Pride. And they would essentially, during live Pride gigs, Sade would do kind of like warm-up sets essentially, and Smooth Operator was one of the songs that kind of built up this following for her. And eventually they decided to split from Pride and do their own thing. And their debut gig, it was in the nightclub Heaven in London, and apparently there were over 1,000 people who had to be turned away because it was so crowded and so packed out and so many people wanted to attend, which I think for a debut gig, you know, you can't complain there. Most debut gigs don't get 1,000 people in the first place. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive. And from that, Sade herself was signed to Epic Records in 1983, and then the rest of the band was sort of signed later on, like early in 1984. And then, you know, halfway through the year 1984, they went on to release this. So this was recorded in the power plant in London, and it was recorded in like 6 weeks. So again, like as with everything I've mentioned so far, like a really quick turnaround. They're like, go in, get it done, get it out, boom, like massively quick release. And for something that was kind of like, you know, so quick to be put together, what an impressive album to release. Like, I think if you've heard any of these songs, you know how sort of like timeless and classic and tasteful they are. And I will talk individually about some of the songs, but just the way that this whole album goes together, it does kind of blend into one, but in a very good way. It feels like a sort of a very cohesive experience, and it's just got that vibe to it, which I think like everybody can appreciate, regardless of whether or not you're into sort of this like smooth soulfulness. Like this is something quite special, and I think they captured something very, very particular with this debut. So as far as songs go, the debut single was Your Love Is King. That's track 2 on the album. If I'm honest, probably my least favourite song, but it did really, really well, and like a groundswell of kind of fandom from that alone. I think it hit like number 6 in the UK. Didn't do so well in the US, but later on down the line, Smooth Operator, that did very well in the US, and surprisingly that did worse in the UK. I think that only hit like number 19 in the UK, which is very odd. But yeah, Your Love Is King, like it's a good song, but I would say for me personally, it's probably the weakest on the album. Between that and the final track, I think, as far as like not worst, but like my least preferred tracks of the album. Smooth Operator is the opening track, and for me that is like the perfect opener. It kind of sets a statement. It really just kind of like that's the tone for the album set immediately. And tonally and sound wise, it is a fantastic sounding album, and this is one of those ones, you know, I'm a big fan of every single format in general. I think they all have their place, and you know, for particular things any album can be listened to in any way, but for me this is the like definitive way to listen to this album is on vinyl. There's something about electric piano, like the Fender Rhodes they use on this, saxophone, and the sort of tasteful drumming with lots of snare, like rim barks, like all of that put together. It kind of, for me, it sits right at home as a vinyl oriented record. And obviously at the time it kind of would have been predominantly kind of aimed at this sort of market, but for me it still to this day kind of sits here as the best way to listen to it. So yeah, Smooth Operator, as I say, fantastic way to start the album. For me, my favourite part is when it kind of like kicks in during the chorus, and you go from having everything being a little bit subtle, and then the whole sort of band really kind of ramping up, and the drums kicking in properly, and that fantastic snare sound. The way the drums are mixed across the whole album, the snare is tight, it's punchy, but it still sounds rich and deep. The kick is low, like it's smooth, it's warm, and the hi-hats, they're so loud, but they're like pleasingly loud. There's a real crispness to them, and it kind of cuts through, and it really just, together with the rest of the instrumentation, it is odd almost how on paper everything should be crowding each other, but it doesn't. It just fits, it just works. So yeah, Smooth Operator, great track, great production. For me, my favourite track on here is Cherry Pie, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that something I've heard from the production and the studio sessions of it. Cherry Pie, none of the effects were automated on it, so they essentially had to sit behind a mixing desk while they were sort of committing it to the master, and like move faders and stuff to add in effects, and like, you know, dial in reverb, dial in delay. And if that is true, I think it adds something to it. There's a real sort of like, there's a human element that kind of gets lost in automation, and obviously like automation is great, it's very important, especially nowadays when you have songs with so many layers. But actually when you sort of tear this down and you look at it, and not just only in terms of the band layout, but also like the number of people, the personnel involved on this album, it's a relatively simple sort of arrangement. You haven't got that many people involved, and you know, you compare it to other sort of pop acts at the time. Actually, this is like really laid back. I know this isn't pop, but you know, it's still kind of pop. So for me, that is why Cherry Pie is my favourite track. Just listening to the intricacies, you know, I like analysing it, but at the same time it is still a great song, and to hear those sort of like human touches, it really adds a lot to it, in my opinion. Another great track is just after Cherry Pie is Sally. Really smooth and sultry, but again, it's the effects on the track which really, like, they really grab me. And there's a very subtle delay on the snare, and it's essentially just like one, maybe two repeats of each snare hit, but it kind of, it sets the stage, it makes it feel sort of theatrical and dramatic. It kind of, obviously delay and reverb, they evoke space and like roominess, but it makes it feel late night. It makes it feel sort of like you're in some sort of open area of the city, maybe. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I think it's very easy with a lot of these songs to sort of kind of sit back and just kind of think about the narrative of them, and it does paint a very particular picture, in my opinion. And I think the album really like grasps that very well. The only gripe I do have with this album is the final track, Why Can't We Live Together? Great song, but the end of it is very abrupt, really like. And I remember like the first time I sort of sat down and listened to it all in one go, I remember being quite surprised by that being where it was, especially when things like I Will Be Your Friend have a fade out. So it's not like they didn't want to have fade outs. It's just that song in particular, just boom. You know, stylistic choice, I'd imagine. But for me, it's quite kind of like blindsides you a little bit, because it does feel like the song could go on longer and you wouldn't mind it. As for the overall performance of the album, as I said, the singles did very well. The album itself went to #2 in the UK charts. It ended up selling like 1.3 million copies, I think. And, you know, they followed up the success really quickly. The second album came out like the year after. That was 1985. I think it was in November of 1985. So maybe we'll do that in a few months' time. But yeah, just the whole thing, I've spoken about it before, like when you have bands and albums where you can tell everybody is really playing at their best and is kind of like they're firing on all cylinders, and this feels like it. It feels like the way everything was formed so quickly and put together, and the sound of it, to me, it feels like they really had like a desire to really get these songs out and get this released. And the energy behind that it feels very present, despite the fact that it's quite down tempo and relaxed, soulful music. It feels like passionate at the same time, and I think for me that's why this album is like so timeless. Like you can't really, in a way you can't really place it. Like this could come out today, and I think it would still be a relevant album. It would still be a successful album, and you know that, in my eyes, is the mark of a genuinely true masterpiece of music. Highly recommend. If you haven't heard this album, or if you have and you haven't heard it on vinyl, get yourself a copy. They aren't expensive, and as I said, for me, this is one of those ones. It is an essential vinyl record. In particular, the sound, the production, the songs, the writing, they are all stellar. Highly recommended.